important thing. If you don't know from whence you came, it's hard to clearly understand where you are, and it's nearly impossible to plan where you're going. And when we were in overseas this year, we were in Italy, and there was a young American woman there, and she had an elderly woman with her. It was obviously either her grandmother or her great-grandmother, and the elderly woman spoke Italian, and of course the young American woman spoke English. And I heard the older woman, she had a cane. We were in an old historic part of the city. And she pointed with her cane and she said, "Up there is where my grandparents went to church." And she grabbed that young lady by the hand and took her there. And I just thought, wow, what a powerful thing to be able to walk through that much of her history. One of the things that, unless you're African American, you won't understand this. One of the things that we have struggled with is that our history starts short. We can't really go back to the beginning. We can guess or estimate where we may have come from or how we might have gotten here, but it stops short. But it is a history, and eventually it's going to be a long history, and it's important that we know that history. If you don't know that history, people can take you back to places where you don't want to go. If you don't know that history, people can make statements about your present that aren't truthful, and you can assume that they are true because you don't know. And it's disrespectful for anybody of any color, black or white, to look at where we are today as a people and to somehow suggest that we're worse off. And for you as an African American to think for 1 second that somehow you are worse off in this country than your foreparents were, who were brought here in shackles, who died in Middle Passage, or buried in unmarked graves all over this country, who lived piled on top of one another, who were not even considered human in the Constitution, who were spoken of so derogatorily in our national anthem that the words had to be omitted in order for you to feel included, who were denied the right to vote, subjected to drinking out of a labeled water fountain, unable to sit and have lunch at a counter, let alone work behind that counter. For anybody to suggest that somehow what my grandfather, your grandfather, what my grandmother, your grandparents, for someone to suggest that the stripes they took, the beatings they endured, the bombings they stood through, the arrests, the dog attacks, and the hosings, and the marching that they did has somehow left me in a worse place is beyond the height of disrespect. And for any black person to somehow look at today and think that somehow you, who are a benefactor of the premature death of thousands, are worse off is beyond ignorance. I would suggest that you need to buy a ticket and go to that museum and learn from whence you came. Doesn't mean that things are perfect. Doesn't mean that things are all the way they should be. We know that the world biblically the Bible has told us that things are going to wax worse and worse. But I think it's important that you don't allow anybody to disrespect your history. No one would dare stand and suggest that Jews are worse off today than they have ever been, regardless of what the unemployment rate is, because their foreparents went through the Holocaust. Nobody would dare suggest that Germans are worse off today because they had to endure the reign of Hitler. No one would dare suggest that Native Americans are worse off today because they went through the genocide that accompanied the colonization of this country. And so you have to be careful what you hear and how you think. Just because things may be bad off for you doesn't mean that they're bad off. Just because some may be suffering doesn't mean that they're suffering at the magnitude at which others have suffered. So I'll have more to say at another time. But I just think that's important. For 110 years, there's been a proposal to put that museum in place. 110. So I would suggest the 108 years previous to this were worse than this one. So, I have some announcements. That wasn't even on my sheet of paper. That just came out. The teaching series on